Ruth hit the ground hard, her hand gripping her belly. Pain shot through her face where Victor had slapped her. Victor! Why? She whispered, tears in her eyes. Victor stood over her, breathing heavily. I am tired. Ruth, tired of you, tired of everything. Ruth struggled to sit up. I am carrying your child. Victor scoffed. And so, does that make you any better? From the corner of the room, two small faces peeked out. Lillian and Becky. Lillian grabbed Becky's hand and pulled her close. Shh, don't let him see us. Becky's lips trembled. But he is hurting mommy. Lillian's heart pounded. She wanted to run to their mother, but she was too scared. Victor turned slightly, his eyes shifting towards the doorway. Lillian quickly pulled Becky back into the darkness. Ruth saw them. She saw the fear in their eyes, and in that moment, she knew she had already failed them. Ruth's life changed forever on a rainy evening when her husband, Charles, didn't make it back home. A tragic car accident took him away, leaving Ruth to face the world alone with their two daughters, Lillian and Becky. One minute, she was a happy wife and mother. The next, she was a widow, left to raise two daughters all alone. Bills piled up, debts grew. The landlord was knocking, and Ruth, she was drowning. But no matter how hard life got, she refused to break. At sunrise, she was already in the market selling anything she could just to put food on the table. Some days they ate, some days they didn't. But no matter how little they had, Ruth made sure her daughters, Lillian and Becky, never slept hungry, even if she had to. Mommy, don't worry, 10 years old Lillian would say, wiping her mother's sweat. One day, I will make you proud. Those words kept Ruth going, but deep down she was tired, tired of fighting, tired of struggling. Then came Victor, handsome, well dressed, always with a smile that made him look like a savior. At first, Ruth didn't pay much attention, but Victor noticed her. He saw the tiredness in her eyes, the weight on her shoulders. Ruth, he said one afternoon, leaning against a market stall, you work too hard. Let the man take care of you now. She laughed. Men had promised her the world before, but Victor was different. He didn't just talk, he showed up. He helped carry her heavy bags, brought her food when she forgot to eat, even bought treats for Lillian and Becky. Little by little, he broke down her walls. Marry me, he said one evening, holding her hand. You won't have to struggle anymore. Ruth hesitated. Marriage? Again? But Victor was kind. He loved her daughters like his own and always made her feel safe. For the first time in years, Ruth believed she could finally breathe. She had no idea the nightmare that was waiting for her. At first, life with Victor felt like a dream. With Victor around, life became easier. She no longer had to worry about unpaid bills or where their next meal would come from. He made sure they had everything they needed: food, clothes, and even small luxury she couldn't afford before. Victor was charming, thoughtful, always ready to help. You've suffered enough, Ruth, he would say, holding her close. Let me take care of you. For the first time in a long while, Ruth felt safe. Victor wasn't just good to her, he was good to the girls too. The girls adored him. Can we call you daddy? Lillian asked one evening, a small voice full of hope. Victor smiled. Of course, my princess. I love you. Ruth heart swelled with gratitude, watching her daughters laugh and play again. She told herself she had made the right choice. This was what she had prayed for: a happy family and a stable home. Everything seemed perfect. She had no idea that the dream was about to turn into nightmare. It started with small things. Victor stopped smiling as much. The laughter at home grew quieter. Little moments of tension replaced warmth Ruth had felt once. At first, Ruth didn't understand what was wrong. Then one evening, Victor came home later than usual. His face was tense, his movements stiff. He barely spoke during dinner, only nodding when Ruth asked if he was okay. She didn't know that earlier that day, Victor had gone to see his old friends. Victor, the family man, one of them teased, slapping his back. How does it feel raising another man's children? Another laughed. Victor forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Those girls will never see you as their real father, you know, someone added, taking a sip of his drink. And when they grow up, they will leave you just like their mother will leave you. Victor had done everything for Ruth and the girls. He had fed them, clothed them, given them a home. But now, for the first time, he questioned it. Did they really see him as a father? Or was it just a standing until they were old enough to move on? Later, when he visited his mother, the conversation got worse. She shook her head, her voice sharp. Victor, or Daniel, you are a fool. You are wasting your money on another man's family. What about your own blood? Won't you have your own children? But Ruth is pregnant, he blurted out, hoping to silence her. His mother scoffed. And you think one child will make a difference? That woman has two daughters who will always come first. Mark my words, Victor, you will never be number one in her life, aside from those girls. That night, something inside Victor changed. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mother's words ringing in his ears. You will never be number one in her life. The girls will always come before you. He talked about how Lillian and Becky laughed more with their mother, how Ruth always checked on them first before asking if he was okay, how the girls still talked about their late father like he was some kind of hero. Suddenly, it all made sense. Maybe he had been fooling himself. Maybe they would never truly see him as a father. Maybe he was just a man passing through their lives, someone temporary. And the thought of that made him angry. At first, Ruth didn't notice the change. It was small. The way he pulled away when he reached for his hand, the way he sighed when Becky asked him a question, the way his patience, once endless, started running thin. Then came the pregnancy. Ruth thought he would be happy. Another child, a fresh start. But when she told him, his face didn't light up at all. Instead, his jaw tightened. Are you sure? He asked, his voice cold. Of course I am, Ruth said, forcing a smile. Victor didn't say another word. He only nodded and walked away. That night, he didn't touch her. He didn't even look at her. From that day, things got worse. Victor became moody, snapping over the smallest things. If Ruth asked simple question, he would roll his eyes. Can't you think for yourself? He snapped one evening when she asked what he wanted for dinner. The man who once helped with chores now sat on the couch, expecting Ruth to do everything, even when she was tired, even when her belly grew heavy. But it wasn't just Ruth who noticed the change. Lillian and Becky saw it too. Victor, who once played with them, now barely spoke to them. When Becky ran up for a hug one day, he pushed her aside. Go to your mother, he muttered, walking away. The girl started avoiding him. But Lillian, at 12, was more observant. She noticed the way Victor's eyes lingered on her longer than before, the way he stood too close when no one was looking. She didn't know why, but it made her uncomfortable. One night, as Ruth lay asleep, Lillian woke up to the sound of her door creaking open. She held her breath. A shadow stood at the doorway, and it was Victor. She held her breath, hoping, praying that Victor would turn around and leave, but he didn't. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Shh, don't be scared, he whispered. Lillian froze. Her hands clutched the blanket tightly. She wanted to scream, but fear trapped the sound in her throat. Victor sat on the edge of her bed. His eyes were different, dark, unreadable, nothing like the man who had once played with her at the park. I just want to talk, he said, but the way his hand rested on her leg made his skin crawl. She pulled away, shaking her head. Please go, she whispered. Victor's smile faded as he forced himself on her. You don't want to upset me, do you? Lillian didn't move. Good girl, he said, his voice low. Now listen, if you ever tell anyone about this, they won't believe you anyway. Your mother, she loves me. She needs me. If you say anything, you will destroy this family. Tears burned Lillian's eyes. Do you want to be the reason your mother suffers? Victor asked. Lillian shook her head, her body trembling. That's my girl, he whispered before slipping out of the room. When he left, Lillian called into a ball, silent tears soaking her pillow. She wanted to run to tell her mother, but Victor's words echoed in her head. She needs me, so she stayed quiet. Days turned into weeks, and the visit continued. Lillian started avoiding Victor, but it didn't matter. He always found a way. A quiet moment when Ruth was out of sight, a firm grip on her breast when no one was looking, a whispered reminder that she had nowhere to go. She became quiet, withdrawn. Becky noticed first. Lily, what's wrong? Becky asked one evening. Nothing, Lillian mumbled, avoiding her sister's eyes, but Becky wasn't convinced. Becky was only 10. She didn't understand what was happening. All she knew was that something was very, very wrong. But like Lillian, she stayed quiet. Victor had trapped them both in silence. And Ruth, she was too blinded by love to see what was happening right under her nose. Ruth noticed the changes. Something was wrong. But every time Ruth thought about it, she shook the feeling away. It's just a phase, she told herself. They are growing up. Victor had also changed. He wasn't as patient as before. He always came home late. He barely looked at her. When she tried to talk to him, he would snap. I'm stressed, Ruth, he would say. Do you think providing for this family is easy? She would sigh, rub her belly and whisper, I understand. Because she did. Victor had taken on a lot, raising children that weren't his, preparing for a baby of his own. Maybe that was why he was distant. Maybe that was why the girls were acting strangely. It made sense, so she ignored the signs. One afternoon, as Ruth washed dishes, Lillian stood behind her, fidgeting. Mommy, her voice was small. Mm, Ruth didn't turn. If someone does something bad to you, but they say not to tell, what would you do? Ruth wiped her hands and turned to face her daughter. Why are you asking that? Lillian hesitated. She wanted to tell her mother. She wanted to scream it out. But then she thought of Victor's warning. She needs me. Nothing, she whispered instead. Just a question. Ruth exhaled. You shouldn't keep secrets from me, okay? Lillian nodded, but deep inside, she knew the truth. Her mother wasn't ready to listen. A few days later, Becky tried too. Ruth was sitting on the couch, rubbing her swollen feet. Becky climbed onto her lap, wrapping small arms around her. Mommy, can we go away? She asked. Go where? Ruth smiled. Somewhere far. Ruth chuckled. And leave your daddy behind. What about the baby? Becky's body stiffened. He is not her daddy, she muttered. Ruth frowned. Becky, don't say that. Victor loves you girls. Becky opened her mouth to speak, but stopped herself. There was no point. Her mother wouldn't believe her, so she let it go. And Ruth, she convinced herself that everything was fine, even as her daughter slipped further and further away from her. A few days later, in the middle of the night, Ruth woke up to use the bathroom. She was halfway down the hall when she heard it. Whispers. At first, she ignored it. Maybe one of the girls was having a bad dream. But then she heard a voice that made her freeze. Please, please, don't. Lillian's voice. Small, shaking. Ruth's heartbeat quickened. She took another step forward, pressing herself against the wall. The voices were coming from Lillian's room. Then Victor's voice, low, firm, and terrifying. If you tell anyone, you will regret it. Your mother needs me. Do you want to be the one to destroy this family? Ruth felt the air leave her lungs. For a moment, she couldn't move, couldn't think. The world around her blurred as her mind raced through every moment she had ignored. The fear in Lillian's eyes, Becky's sudden silence, the way her daughters barely spoke anymore. She had told herself everything was fine. She had convinced herself she was protecting them. She had been wrong all along. She didn't think. She opened the door and found Lillian sat curled up on her bed, her face wet with tears. Victor stood beside her, towering over her like a shadow. When he saw Ruth, he didn't flinch. Go back to bed, Ruth, he said calmly, like nothing was wrong. Ruth stared at him, her whole body trembling. Tell me I didn't just hear what I heard. Victor sighed, running a hand over his face. You're overreacting. Overreacting? Ruth's voice cracked. Lillian called into herself, as if trying to disappear. Ruth's heart chattered. Look at her. Ruth shouted, pointing at their daughter. Tell me she's lying. Victor's face darkened. You don't understand, Ruth. I take care of this family. Without me, you have nothing. You can't do this alone. His words stabbed deep, but this time they didn't hold power over her. Ruth looked at Lillian, then at Becky's room, then at her growing belly. She had to choose stay and let the nightmare continue, or walk away and protect her children. Ruth had always believed she was a strong woman, a good mother, someone who would do anything for her children. But that night, as she stood frozen in Lillian's room, staring at the man she once trusted, she realized something terrifying. She was afraid. Victor's words echoed in her head. Without me, you have nothing. She looked at Lillian, a little girl, broken and trembling. She looked down at her belly, the unborn child that needed a father. And for the first time, Ruth doubted herself. How would she survive without Victor? How would she raise three children alone? Would anyone believe her? Would society ever accept her as a woman who had failed at marriage twice? She had nothing, no savings, no backup plan, no family to run to. Living meant stepping into the unknown. Staying meant keeping her family together. Mommy, please, Lillian whispered, her voice barely audible. Becky stood behind her, watching, waiting, hoping. Ruth opened her mouth to speak, but no word came out. Victor was watching too. He didn't have to say anything. His presence alone was a reminder. You need me. So Ruth made her choice. She turned away. Go to bed, she murmured, her voice hollow. Lillian blinked, confused. Mommy? Go to bed, Ruth snapped, her voice shaking. She turned and left the room, closing the door behind her. And with that, whatever was left of her daughter's trust shattered. Lillian sat still, staring at the closed door. Her mother had heard everything, and still she stayed. Becky wiped her face with trembling hands. She's not coming back, is she? Lillian didn't answer. She didn't have to. Their mother had made her choice, and it wasn't them. Lillian never looked back. The moment she gained admission into a polytechnic, she knew she had to leave. Staying in that house, under Victor's roof, near her mother who had chosen to ignore their pain, was no longer an option, so she escaped. She picked a school far from home and found a way to survive on her own. She took up part-time jobs, cleaning offices in the morning, working at a small restaurant in the evening, anything to keep herself afloat. She had no savings, no safety net, but she had her freedom, and that was enough. Becky was in SS3, just months away from finishing secondary school, but Lillian knew what staying in that house would do to her. So, when Becky confided in her one evening over the phone, whispering, I can't take it anymore, Lillian made a decision. She sent Becky transport money, and one early morning before Victor woke up, Becky packed her things and left. She didn't say goodbye to their mother. She didn't owe her one. Life wasn't easy, but it was better. Becky had to put school on hold. She started taking tutorial classes instead, using the little money they earned to pay for lessons in the evening, while working in a small supermarket during the day. Lillian worked even harder. Part-time schooling, part-time job, full-time survivor. They had no luxury, no comfort, no one to rely on but themselves. But they were free, and that was worth everything. One night, as they sat in their small rented room, Becky turned to Lillian. Do you ever think about mom? She asked quietly. Lillian didn't answer right away. Did she think about Ruth? Yes. Did she miss her? No. She made her choice. Lillian finally said, staring at the ceiling. Now we have to live with us. But even as she said it, the pain lingered. Ruth's betrayal had left scars, scars that ran deep. Lillian didn't trust easily. She kept people at a distance, afraid that if she let anyone in, they would hurt her too. She hated the mirror. She hated the voice in her head that told her she wasn't good enough, that she was damaged, that she would never be loved. Becky, though equally scared, handled things differently. She was the softer one, the one who still had a little hope left, the one who still believed that maybe one day they could truly heal. Lily, do you think we will ever be okay? Becky whispered. Lillian exhaled, closing her eyes. I don't know, but at least now they had each other. And for now, that was enough. What if Ruth had left? What if the night she heard Victor threatening Lillian, she had packed their bags and walked away? Maybe Lillian and Becky would have had a childhood free from fear. Maybe they wouldn't have spent years struggling to heal from wound that never should have been there. But Ruth stayed. But this isn't just Ruth's story. This is the story of many children, many women, many families living in silence, afraid of what might happen if they leave. To them, I say this: silence doesn't protect you, it only gives power to those who hurt you. If you are in a place of fear, if someone is hurting you, speak up, find help, choose yourself, because staying in a broken home doesn't make it whole. And love, true love, should never come at the cost of your pain. You deserve better. If you enjoyed this story, kindly subscribe to Nigerian Life Stories for more. Thanks for watching. Bye.